Okay, here we go. I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. Welcome everybody to Thursday night Big Book Study Workshop with the program of recovery laid out by the first 100 men and women in our basic text. This is the Keystone Group. We have a couple meetings going on during the week, but how we open this meeting is with the Serenity Prayer, seeing where we're at and more about alcoholism. So what do we need for a good meeting? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Right on. Like I said, I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. Sobriety date's April 8, 1989. We're going to kind of rock and rolling. For those who've been following along, I'm sure Ray did a great job last Thursday. Thanks for filling in for me. It was the in-laws' 60th anniversary. So the wife told me I had to be a certain place at a certain time, and guess where I was at a certain place at a certain time, right? So we all know who's the boss in my relationship, right? Yeah, we all know it's not. Yeah, that's right. As everybody look at their wives, right, and all the women start laughing. Yeah. Anyhow, so for those who've been following along, one of the things I have the benefit of is not only in my own recovery. I've worked with thousands of people, right? And I don't mean that in a bragging way. I mean that in a way like to be of service at a level that kind of allowed me to do what I do. Like I've been doing Big Book Study Workshops now for over 35 years. This April 8th will be 36 years. And then I'll be in my 37th year, right? So I'm in actually my 36th year now, and I'll be completing it April 8th, right? So one of the things that really saved my life was I talk about this with a lot of people. A lot of people in AA talk about step one, but they haven't had a step one experience, right? And all the way through the book, that the people who put this together, they talk about having a step one experience. And if you kind of ask somebody what that meant, and they weren't book based, they wouldn't be able to answer that, right? So the book kind of answers all these things ourselves. So when we looked at the condition of the illness of alcoholism, and we got all the information that brought us up to moving into the second symptom of alcoholism, which started on page 21. And they talk about, well, what about the person that can't get sober based on the idea that they need to get sober? Right? And so they have to define this person. So they define them as the real alcoholic. And the doctor talked about this person, right? And now they're putting a label on it or a definition on it. So when we refer to that, we know what we're talking about. When someone tells me they're a real alcoholic, they just describe to me the illness of alcoholism and what placed them beyond human aid. And in the doctor's opinion, he kind of made reference to that people that were outside his scope of helping, right? And so a lot of people that went through his facility were able to grasp on the program of recovery that he put together by means of probably a lot of self-discipline, self-awareness, working on childhood issues, working on responsibility, debt consolidation, like all these things to make you an active working member of society. Right? And watch out for triggers, watch out for this, watch out for that, become a better person, right? And we've all tried that. How many people have tried that approach, right? I just got to become a better person, right? When I become a better person, then I won't drink anymore. And if I don't think about it, I'll be okay, right? And then we find out this refers to a different type of person than the doctor talks about being beyond human aid. And his first reference to somebody that was beyond human aid that found a solution other than what he was offering, we know is Bill, right? They talked about the introduction to the letter, saying upon his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas that he put into practice that he was able to recover from an illness that had him baffled. And the doctor had him labeled as beyond, right, human aid, right, incurable, chronic, right? So he witnessed this thing happening in his facility, and as we go along, he introduced us to the idea of this allergy, an abnormal reaction to alcohol. Most of us understand that. I understand it as when I have a drink, I'm thinking about the next drink before I'm finishing the first drink. Any of my people here? Huh? Normal people don't do that, which I find very confusing. right? So I'm more concerned with the next drink than I am the drink I'm having, right? So we understand that as an allergy. And if I was able to just stop drinking, then I wouldn't be concerned with the rest of it. I wouldn't ended up in all the trouble I ended up, all the consequences and all the misfortune that I continue to experience and those around me, right? So it's like I'm allergic to pistachios, right? When I got diagnosed with that, I ended up in the hospital. I haven't eaten them since, right? I know if I don't eat them and watch what I do and all that stuff, I'll be fine. But if there was a part of my mind that couldn't see the danger of that, and I kept on doing it in spite of my experience, then there'd be something a little more serious going on, yes? Right? And especially if it happened more than a couple times, and then me trying to console everybody around me that it's not going to happen again, but it just happened 3 times over the last 2 weeks, 5 years, or whatever the duration is from my last experience to have it happen again. Anybody have that story? Able to go periods of time, and we think it's successful, but what we find out is the illness is lying dormant. So when they talk about, what's lying dormant, right? So they talk about on page 20, they introduce us to the idea of the real alcoholic in 21, 22. They talk about if we never took that drink again, we wouldn't trigger the allergy, right? So we're starting to find out we don't have a consequence problem. We have an illness associated with alcoholism. If I can't control the amounts of drink, there's always going to be problems. So my idea of a successful drinking is, if there was no consequence, how much did you drink? Oh, just enough not to get in trouble. Anybody calculate their drinking career like that? No, how much did you drink? I don't know. Enough not to get in trouble. Well, what happened the other night? You got in trouble. I drank too much. Well, how much was too much? I don't know, but I got in trouble. So the amounts, so that association, so the consequences bring me to the realization there's something else going on beyond my understanding. And so here we find out about the allergy. And then here they talk about, well, why do I keep on doing that? If hundreds of episodes have shown me that there's been some form of consequence, directly or indirectly, and it's affected people, places, and things, and my life in the course of the direction that I had hoped for, but it robbed me of those ideas, dreams, and plans, loved ones, and the realization that I never lost these people lost me, and I couldn't recreate my life. Now I'm a little baffled why I'm at this place, right? There's something happening beyond my ability to understand. So when they started explaining this, they talk about on page 23 that the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind. And so what happens if you just left it at that and you went with your understanding, you think, see, yes, behavior is the way I think, the way I act. No, that's a human condition that you'll always be left with. What they're talking about here is something very specific in regards to the illness, right? And as long as this component is present, I'll continue to drink. So this component that they talked about, and by those who went before me said this component got removed. How it got removed is that they recovered. So you hear a lot of people describe the 10-step promises. They're not the 10-step promises. It's an overview of their experience of having taken all the steps. Where they talk about by this time sanity will have returned. The problem has been removed. What problem? The problem that they're going to talk about here is this malady that centers in the mind. They go on to talk about here. But the problem with this condition is there's another problem associated with that, is the idea that we could fix ourselves. We're obsessed with the idea of fixing ourselves. Yes, anybody? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Well, why didn't you do it the last time? Oh, because I mean it this time. See how the mind works? It's the inability to see the truth because I haven't had a step 1 experience yet. I still think there's something I can do based on me and my experience to stop me from having that experience again. The desperate experimentation of picking up that drink. Anybody been there? How many people? As long as I do this, this, and this, and this, I'll be okay. Right? Most people don't say, as long I really need to have this psychic change or spiritual experience, otherwise I'm going to continue to drink. Says nobody coming back. Right? When they share, they give you a long list of things they need to do. And when a lot of people share in regards to step 1, they start sharing with all the associated problems with the human condition. they don't isolate what the problem is. They start talking about trauma. They start talking about difficulties in life. They start talking like it's an excuse why they are an alcoholic or what makes them drink. It may make you thirsty, but it don't make you drink, right? Because people who don't have all those problems are unable to stay sober. So what's this thing? The malady is a condition that they know is present, but they really don't know how to define it. Does that kind of make sense? So they need to explain it in a way that they explain the allergy, right? Is an abnormal reaction, and this is what it looks like for those that have it. So when they talk about here, as they started going through this, they talk about lack of choice, loss of choice. And it kind of seems weird because I made a choice today not to drink. I'm not drinking today. That's the way the mind goes to it. It goes to the rationalization. Look how well I did the last time or the time before that and the time before that. They missed the fact that that time of sobriety was interrupted by some sequence that happened in the mind that made sense for them to take the drink. Right? And they think they were successful the time before that because they got 3 months, 6 months, or a year. But really, the illness was lying dormant. It wasn't removed, and they couldn't see, feel, and touch. And when it represented itself, they found themselves drinking. In hindsight, what am I doing? I don't know. Anybody like that here? What am I doing after I drink? Well, why didn't you tell me that before I drank, right? My wife would be pretty alarmed if she came down here and seen me eating a bowl of pistachios in light of what happened to me the last time. And I'd look at her and go, what? Which would make her even more alarmed, right? Anybody ever relapse here and the people around you are quite concerned and you go, what? You look at them like, what's your problem? They're like, we're about to find out. Shit's about to hit the fan, right? And we're like, la, 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 la. Anyways, moving on. So they talk about over here on page 24, right? When this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he's probably placed himself beyond human aid. Wow, when this sort of thinking, what sort of thinking is the introduction to the malady? When this malady, this condition that leaves you baffled, that in spite of everything you've done, learned, or been through, there you are again. And who was an example of that was Bill's story. Remember, Bill's story was an example of that, of what alcoholism looks like in somebody's life, the inability for him to get sober. Even though the desire is there. Remember the first time he left treatment, he felt fantastic. Anybody remember leaving treatment the first time, feeling fantastic? The second time, not so much. The third time, it's like, good to see you again. Let me take your file out, right? So it's kind of like, so something different has to happen, right? So then they talk about here the problem, and on page 25, they talk about the solution. So page 24 is an outline of step one. Page, really, when you look at it, page 22, 23, and 24 is an outline of step one. Right? So page 25 is the introduction or the idea that started back in the book from the doctor's opinion to the introduction of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous of receiving this from the title page. We have Alcoholics Anonymous of more than 1,000 men, 100 men and women who have recovered. And they talk about the story of how many thousands of men and women who have recovered from alcoholism. So they talk about this hope and this thing that's present. So page 25 is an outline of step two. So what is step two? Step two is the course of action necessary to recover from the condition that they're talking about on page 24. Yes? And we see it's a group of actions. It's just not a singular thing of developing an understanding or your own understanding of God, your own understanding. It's nothing to do with your understanding at this stage. At this stage of the game, we're telling you what our solution is to this problem. And this is what it looks like for those that went before us, yes? Right? And then it talks about if you're a serious alcoholic, as we were, we believe there's no middle of the road solution, right? We're in a position where life has become impossible. And if we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, what's that region? Is the malady, this condition of the mind. If I've passed into that, when does that happen? They don't know. They can't answer the riddle that once a certain point is reached, little or nothing can be done for these people. Right? And so if you've passed into that region, how do I know that? How many times have you relapsed? Tells you if you're in that region or not. Bill, it was more than twice he went back to treatment. The third time he was in that region, the doctor described him as chronic. The third time. So if you've relapsed if you got more than 2 silver 24-hour chips, welcome to the family. Right? You're a collector. Let's get you over to the next chip. Some of us are real proud. We put it on keychains. 4 silver ones. 1 red one and half a green one. Okay, move on. Okay, reel it in, Tony. Okay, so they talk about here, right at the bottom of page 25, they talk about we had 2 alternatives. An alternative means as the result of. So we're here as the result of alcoholism. That's where we are. And the position is, I need a different alternative, and as the result of that course of action, I'll have a different experience. It's like having a GPS. Just because your GPS says turn here, unless you turn there, you're going to continue to go down the same road, yes? And all the warning signs, turn here, recalculating. How many people's lives are recalculating, got to do this, got to change that, and you ignore it. Turn the volume down. Right? The red light comes on the dash, put a piece of black tape over it. That's how we deal with shit. Letting go means hopefully I can forget about it by tomorrow. Okay, so one was to go on to the bitter end, obviously, because you can't change the projection that you're on, right? You're continuously the decline, that you're changing your life to accommodate the illness that has you. You don't have it. It has you. It's dictating what you do, feel, and see, and what you engage in. Anybody? And you talk to it. You talk to this illness that what are you doing? I can't believe you're doing this. Man, you got to do better. Come on. Like really try, or make promises, make solemos. Anybody? Frothy emotional appeal. Give me one more chance. You're talking to the illness, and the illness don't understand English. Right? This is, anyway, so, and the other was to accept spiritual help. And that's the introduction to the course of action that's going to be presented here. I don't know exactly what they mean by that, but I have an outlay of those who have had the experience up to the reading so far. We've seen that in Bill's story. We've seen that in the doctor's opinion. We've seen that in introduction to the forewords. We've seen that here on page 25, right? And so they talk about here on this idea of a certain business. Why do they have this guy in 26 is to see what the struggle looks like to be self-obsessed with fixing self and not having the step 1 experience yet. Because if you had the step 1 experience, you would realize that all these things that he's engaged in is not going to work for him, right? Or yourself. You need a specific solution to a specific problem. But most of us are like this guy on page 26, right? And then when the illness represents itself, we're baffled that we've relapsed again after 5 years, 2 years, 6 years, 10 years, whatever the case may be. How long we're able to avoid the first drink, right? And they talk about that, right? Even though you've been able to rise such a defense, and one day will give way to a trivial excuse, right? English is not my first language, so bear with me, okay? So they talk about here this guy going through this, and then he relapses again. Remember what he thought relapse was unthinkable. So has this person actually done step 1 yet? No, but he's admitted he has a problem, but a problem he can fix. So has he done step 1? And that's a lot of people in our fellowship. They admit they have a problem, but it's a problem they can fix. Right? And so we go over to the next page and we see that after the relapse, he goes back to the doctor, or he goes back to a meeting and he runs into one of us, and the doctor says, you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I've never ever seen one case, right, recover. Basically, he talks about, the doctor said, you have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. Page 26, I've never seen one single case recover where the state of mind existed to the extent it does in you. And what's that state of mind? Is the malady, the inability to keep himself sober, regardless of all the effort he puts into his sobriety. He met with the best doctors. This guy had money and influence. This guy had everything going on. He knew his triggers. He knew everything. The inner workings, he was profound. He thought relapse was unthinkable. Why did he think that? Because he doesn't understand the illness of alcoholism. Right? How many people try to get sober here and their lives did get better? And then the mind says, this is a good time to interrupt that. Right? Let's have a drink, right? So then the doctor tells about this solution that he's heard about, that he's been, this phenomenon. So the solution is also a phenomenon. And how do they explain it? Well, they go on to explain this rearrangement of ideas and emotions. And they talk about that in the spiritual appendix, right? They all kind of mean, so the outline of step 9, their experience in step 9 of the promises, their outlay of the experience that they had in step 10 as the result of these things, and the spiritual experience all align with each other. They all happen at the same time. They're not happening individually, right? So when people say the step 9 promises, the step 10 promises, talking like they're two different things, they're not two different things. They're the same thing as the spiritual appendix in the back of the book. And that's what he talks about here, right? The casting of one side, this changing of perspective, the removal of this problem. Then he feels good again, back to the obsession. Well, I believe in God, but he doesn't understand what we're talking about. And then his ideas were, upon hearing this, our friend was somewhat relieved, for he reflected, after all, he was a good church member, obsessed with self again. Look what I'm doing. Look what I'm involved in. Look, I have this relationship. God, blah, blah, blah. Zzz, right? So he talks about this hope, however, was destroyed by the doctors telling him while his religious convictions were very good, in his case did not spell the necessary vital spiritual experience. So it's a very specific solution to a very specific problem. And the more I understand the problem, the more the solution makes sense. And it's kind of like this, right? No alcoholic has ever gotten drunk sitting in a bar. Not one has ever gotten drunk sitting in a bar. Look at everybody's face. I see the face going. They have to drink in order to get drunk. Yes? No alcoholic has ever gotten sober by just sitting in meetings. They have to participate in the solution. Does that kind of make sense? So it kind of, we'll get into that in a second. So they talk about on page 28 here, in the following chapters, there appeared an explanation of alcoholism as we understand it. As who understands it? They do. I need to understand what they're talking about. They use that term a couple times through here. They use it in step 3. They use it in step 11. Right? As we understand, I need to understand how they understand it to conform my own conception on what's being presented to me in order to pursue this solution, to have the same experience that they have. That means they're presenting an idea, and the conception is a course of action to have this result. How the terminology is used to get me from here to here is totally personal to me. So by the time we get to step 3, you could be okay with the word God. I could be okay with the idea of creative intelligence. The wording of what I call it is secondary. Do I understand the intent of what they're talking about, which we'll get into shortly, is this thing that happens deep down within me that I get access to. Lack of power to create a change sufficient enough for me to recover. What's my problem? The inability to create any kind of change in my life long lasting. These people said they've tapped into something that allows them to have a different experience than they've always had. Who was the first example of that? Bill. Right? Remember when he left treatment, he had a formula and a recipe that he put into practice based on the connection he got through the course of action he took, as outlined on page 25. Right? The same course of action that he kind of puts it, maybe expands it a bit for us genius types, right? Subtle form of entrapment. I don't know, whatever you want to call it, right? And so, and then we engage in this thing and we have the same experience. But I need to engage in it, right? But I need to know what the problem is. So I need to understand how they understand it. So more about alcoholism is a really interesting chapter, right? They're going to talk about more of what they've already been talking about. They're not going to Shanghai us with new information. If somebody's going to talk to you more about something, it's usually on the same understanding that you've already engaged in. Yes? Let's talk more about that. Let's kind of go over this again, right? So, how many symptoms have they been referring to so far? 2. But people say, oh, they talked about the spiritual part. That's the solution. It's not the problem. It's the solution to the dilemma that we suffer from, right? And later, like if you need to engage in spiritual principles or spiritual way of life, you need something to apply it to in order to see how this thing works. And when you see the benefit of the application of it and the relief and the experience of it, then it makes more sense. So you need to have something to apply it to in order to have an experience to see, right, what these other people are talking, this power that's available to create a shift. That we read the promises all the time, right? You hear the promise, we think, no, peace of mind, happiness, contentment, usefulness, won't regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. What allowed them to have that experience is they'll suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. They had an experience with the steps. It moved from a knowledge-based understanding that we hear a lot of people talk about, the knowledge of the steps, I'm working the steps, right? Which there's no kind of in treatment and all that form of people working on themselves. They're working on the steps. But all the way through here, they talk about their relationship with something greater than themselves. They're working on that relationship. So that when Bill left, right, treatment, he found he was able to have a different experience. All the other times he was getting drunk, he was finding himself able to stay sober based on certain ideas, a certain principle. One was strenuous work with other alcoholics would get him reconnected to the power source that he needed to survive himself. Does that kind of make sense? For a year and a half, he was plagued. Well, what saved him? Where before he was getting drunk all the time, what was the difference this time? Was he was able to tap into that inner resource, right? And one of the things that we'll get into here, sure, I'll do a disclaimer. They talk about at the end of the chapter that they talk about our defense must come from a power greater than ourselves, because we can't depend on ourselves. Because if we were able to depend on ourselves, we wouldn't need a solution, right? But the whole hope all along was that we could depend on ourselves. Anybody? I talked to this lady today, and in and out, holy, so 15 years. And this is the first time she sat and talked to me. She sat beside me. I've tried to talk to her for years. This is the first time she sat and talked to me, and we talked. I talked about my experience. And she says, you know, Tony, she says, I've tried everything asked of me in Alcoholics, but what Alcoholics Anonymous offers. She says, I've never been through the book. And I said, no, you've never been through the book. I'm just as shocked as you are. And then I talked about my experience, 11 years in and out, the inability to get sober. Someone took me through the book. I got their understanding of the problem, the solution, and their understanding and experience of the application, did the same thing they did. You know what? 36 years later, there must be something to this, right? So more about alcoholism talks about the 2 symptoms of alcoholism, right? What are the 2 symptoms? The first one's the allergy. Do we all agree on that? The second symptom is the introduction of this condition of the mind that they call a malady. Once this malady has a real hold, they are a baffled lot. Why do they call it a malady? It's an unexplainable event that happens in our thinking. Right? They really don't know how to find, but this is what it looks like. These people said they'd never drink again, and they drank again. Like Bill's story. Somebody pushed a drink my way. Was I crazy? A malady, an unexplainable condition that happens with us. But when we explain it to each other, we understand it. You go, yeah, me too. And the people that don't have it go, what the hell are you talking about? You mean, right? So here, most of us have been unwilling to admit we're real alcoholics, meaning having this malady that places us beyond human aid where we can't be our own solution. Right? No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it's not surprising that our drinking career has been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove like we could drink like other people. what that means for us is to drink without consequence. Right? Because I never want, right, to talk about here. The idea that somehow, someday we will control and enjoy our drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. I don't think we have an obsession to control and enjoy our drinking. We have an obsession not to get into trouble. Right? Because I enjoy to drink. I don't know, am I the only one here? Right? Like, I never, if I had one of those stickers that said, half full, 3/4 full, right? Full, it never hit full. It would never be like, it never full, right? So, anyhow, control and enjoy our drinking. When I tried to control and enjoy my drinking, it was painful. How many people here? Painful. Try to control and enjoy your drinking. Oh my God, drink at a normal person's pace without an order. I can't go through with it. So they're talking about the allergy, yes? Okay, the idea that somehow, someday of control and enjoy is the great obsession. What's the great obsession in association with is the allergy that I can control and enjoy my drinking. That I'm not alcoholic, that's the obsession. There's got to be a way I can. So where's the examples of that? All the way through the book, have they given us examples of what they're talking about? Yeah, they didn't say here, oh, the great obsession, figure it out what we mean by that. Did they say that here? They said they're going to talk more about alcoholism. So the first symptom in alcoholism is the allergy. That's what they're talking about here, right? And then they're going to go overall summary, right? The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. What illusion? That I could drink successfully without consequence. Yes? That's the whole goal. But when we find we can't drink without consequence and we're starting to get pretty mangled, then we start saying we have a problem. Because if we could drink without problems, then we'd still be drinking. Yes? Pretty simple. How many people, if you had no consequences, would be sitting here listening to me tonight? Oh, you don't have to be that honest. Come on. So we see, right, that we had an experience in how about so we learned that we fully had to concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. To concede doesn't mean surrender, accept. Page 417. To concede means if you play chess. You ever watch anybody play chess? They play, and the whole idea is to relinquish the king. Yes, that's the whole idea. And so when you get to a point there's no more moves to be made. I concede the game. I concede. Right? Like I realize I'm going to die an alcoholic death. That's what that means, to concede. It means I know I'm going to relapse again 100%, that there's nothing I can do on my own resources, my own power, to stop me from what's coming. Because it's coming. And I'm the only one that don't know when. That's what I'm admitting to. Because if I didn't concede and just accept, then I'll do everything I can not to pick up the first drink. I'll be the most important entity in my talking about my sobriety. Me. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And you notice people who have something talk about their relationship with something greater than themselves in order to have an experience they've never been able to have before. The promises, all the way through the book, they talk about this thing that happens inside. They become God conscious. Our more religious members talk about that God consciousness. But the other people, we talk about tapping into an inner resource that creates a change sufficient enough to have a psychic change of spiritual experience. So going back, the delusion has to be smashed. What has to be smashed? The idea of that I could safely drink and that I could stop myself from drinking. That I have a choice when it comes to the first drink. Because if I had a choice, then I would never end up where I am, would I? I would have stopped a long time ago, like those people they talked about on page 2021, given good reason. How many people here has had good reason to stop and said they'd never do it again and did it again? Welcome to the club. That's what they're talking about here, right? But we get offended. I got a choice. Yeah, sure you do. Here, have a X-Lax. Exercise that choice. You tell me how good you do, okay? So, sorry, did I go there again? Sorry, Ray. So to somewhat behave tonight. So, in regards to this idea of the obsession and being able to control and enjoy our drinking, to drink with impunity, to drink without consequence, the examples of this obsession is on page 31. This is the outlay of what they're, despite all we can say, many who are real alcoholics are not going to believe they're in that class. By every form of self-deception and experimentation, they'll try to prove themselves exceptions to the rule. Does that sound like an obsession? Prove ourselves exceptions to the rule, right? They will try to prove themselves exception to the rule. Therefore, non-alcoholic, not having the allergy. I don't have this physical component that you people do, and given good reason, I could start to modify my drinking. I could drink without consequence, right? A lot of, like, this is where I make friends. I've had a lot of friends and people I know who are addicts that can safely have a drinker, but then it leads them back to the drug of choice. They don't have the physical factor when it comes to alcohol. They can't drink like me. My brother is a certified crackhead. Like he's like, I could never smoke. He's like Charlie Sheen used to talk about. Like he's unbelievable. I've watched him through the years. I've tried to help him, and I am nowhere near the level that he was or is, and nor I don't think I could even function at that level that he's functioning. But he can't drink like I drink. He's never been able to. Never. He's tried. And I've always laughed at him. We smashed up vehicles. He's puked. He's passed out. And I call him a pup, and he can't help himself. But when we got into the other stuff, it was just like, like all bets were off, right? So there is a difference. I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but here they talk about the methods and all that stuff, and they talk about it's important to understand that. And then they talk about on page 33, if we're planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservations of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday we'll be immune to alcohol. Right? And the doctor's opinion says, I can't afford to drink alcohol in any form whatsoever. If there's a possibility of it being in there, can I possibly eat it? It's like if I'm allergic to pistachios, which I am, can I afford to eat it in any quantity? So say if it said non-pistachio milk based on pistachios. I can't. Non-alcoholic beers for non-alcoholics. Simple. Right? I can't imagine drinking a non-alcoholic beer without expecting the effect. Waiting. Like I've never met an addict yet that says, I think I'm just going to bump a couple lines of baby powder because I like the way it feels in my nose. Like, it's like, why would you mess with that? Like, the idea of drinking a beer because I've done step one, the idea of drinking a non-alcoholic beer just kind of gives me anxiety just talking about it. Never mind engaging in it, because the mindset, I've truly done step one. Right? Just, I can't afford it in any form whatsoever. Okay? So, they're saying here, like, even though I do step one, they say, and I want to stay sober forever, they say, well, the likelihood of me being able to do that is not in my favor. And they said, well, why is that? Well, they said, young people may be encouraged by this man's experience to think they could stop as he did. Right? Potential alcoholic, hopefully you read the story, on their own willpower. Which we hear a lot of people in our fellowship talk about stopping on their own willpower. I want to be like them. Why do I want to be like them? Then I don't have to do the steps like them. There's two groups. There's those people who are happy, joyous, and free, big book thumpers, always happy looking to help somebody. Those people. And then there are those over here that are somewhat miserable, discontent, and always working on ourselves, and there's some dilemma going on all the time. We're problem-oriented, right? Can I share? I got another problem. I thought you just did page 417. Yes, on those other things, but I got these things to work on now. But leave it alone. I'm sorry. I went there again. Okay, they talk about, we doubt if many of them can because none will really want to, really. Who really wanted to stop when you're having fun? now and then get a bit of trouble, but you try to curb it, try to drink. Like, I enjoy drinking. Me, I'm the only one here. Anybody? I really enjoyed something about it. Oh, boy. Okay. Hardly one of them because of a particular mental twist. Now they call this malady a particular mental twist, yes? We know even though you want to stop, even though you tried to stop way back, the reason you couldn't stop is because the particular mental twist, where you thought it was your idea, but the idea was already made for you, right? And you engaged and you had to go through the whole gamut again, right? Remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again, being baffled how we got here again, over remorseful, right? Anybody ever been there? Snot and tears running out of your eyes. I can't be here. Humiliated by the things you've done or the things that happen. Anybody? The situations you got yourself into and you swore you'd never do it again, right? And then as 2 weeks go by, 3, all that thinking starts to dissipate. And you forget all about it because it's not happening again. Then it happens again. It's like, oh my God. That's what they're talking about. Particular mental twist. So then they talk about on page 34, for those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. We're assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. That's important. Like, we don't talk people into sobriety here. If you don't want to get sober, then have at it, right? I'm going to go drinking. Good, have fun. Have one for me. That's not our job to talk ourselves out of it. Or as the other says, man, I really want to drink, but I don't want to drink. I don't want to drink. Okay, then come walk with us, right? We'll help you out. Big difference. Whether such a person can quit on a non-spiritual basis depends on to the extent that he or she has already lost the power to choose whether we'll drink or not. So, they talk about this baffling feature. And then on page 35, they talk about, so we shall describe some of the mental twist. Now they call it a mental twist. Right? Interesting. They call it the baffling feature of alcoholism is the malady and the inability to choose at certain times whether I drink or not. Our history ought to determine that. Right? And if I haven't been able to stop myself in the past, what is the likelihood I'll be able to stop myself in the future? Just because I'm feeling better doesn't mean I'm getting better. Right? Huge thing, right? So we shall describe some of the mental twists that precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crutch of the problem. And you hear people say, oh, relapse isn't a part of my story, then you don't understand the story of alcoholism. Because if it wasn't a part of your story, why are you here seeking help? Why didn't you stop back then? Why didn't you stop the 4th or 5th time? Why didn't you stop the 2nd time leaving? Why didn't you stop before you went to treatment? Why didn't you stop before you got the impaired and did those horrific things again and again? Why didn't you stop the last time you had a blackout and did those horrific things? Why didn't you stop when you had your mom's TV pawn ticket in your pocket from her TV, right? Why didn't you stop? Why do you do those horrific things? Because I can't stop. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking. So here, they talk about our first friend is Fred, and then they talk about the 3rd paragraph down. We told him what we knew of alcoholism, what I've just gone through, yes? We just talked about. But Fred has the obsession that based on his own experience, he can keep himself sober. Because he knew if he drank again, he'd be off to the asylum. He'd do, right? He knew of the consequences. Yes? Whatever. Right? So, he knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family's friends. So he has all the reasons in the world not to drink again. Yes? Given good reason. But he hasn't had the step 1 experience yet. Right? And that's coming. So they talk, yet he drank again. And then they ask him to go over it. And he has the suddenly moment. The suddenly. That he's sitting there 2 seconds prior. He's just ordering a glass of milk and a sandwich. Then suddenly, hey, it'd be nice to put an ounce of whiskey in there. Now, people who are obsessed still obsessed with the idea of fixing themselves will look at the situations around him getting drunk. Look, he was irritated. Look, he was at the car dealership. Look, these are the reasons he got drunk. How many people thought that way when reading the story? Look, he was in Overeaters Anonymous. He's having he's having a slip. He's feeling remorseful. How to drink, right? Like I've heard it all, right? Like on and on. He's been in this situation many a times and stayed sober. This one time he was unable to stay sober, even based on his history. So what they're giving you example is what the malady looks like. But the human condition is, let's look at the events around it. Because if you can control the events around it, then it's a behavioral problem. So that's why they give this guy with this problems. Yes, does it kind of make sense? How many people went there reading his story? You hear people say, well, that's why he drank, because this, and this. Right? The reason he drank again is because he hasn't recovered from the condition he's still suffering from. This condition still has him that's lying dormant. Right? He can't see, feel, and touch it. And when it presented itself, it made sense to put an ounce of whiskey in the milk. As an observer, you think this guy was crazy. And he is. He's suffering from temporary insanity. Right? So, suddenly the thought crossed my mind, if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. Does this sound like the guy a page prior? He knew that if he drank again, it would be one more trip to the asylum. He'd lose his friends. Is this the same mentality as the guy on the page before? So something is taken over in his thinking that he can't see, feel, and touch. It's reasoning with him. It's making sense to him. It has him. I vaguely sensed I was not being too smart. I vaguely sensed it. Vaguely sensed I wasn't being too smart, right? But felt reassured I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. The experiment went so well, I ordered another whiskey. This started one more journey to the asylum, right? So they talk about over here on page 37. And this is where they use the phenomena again in regards to our illness. So they talked about once a certain point is reached, little or nothing can be done. And they described this condition as the malady. And then they described it as losing the ability to choose whether we drink or not. Now they're going to summarize it, right? Now they're giving you a couple of examples. They're going to summarize it. And here's how they summarize it. They said, page 37, whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? You may think this is an extreme case. To us, who's the us? Remember, right? We're going to explain alcoholism as we understand. They all agree on this. Not the people who went through Dr. Silkworth's treatment center, all those who couldn't get sober through his treatment center, all those who were approached afterwards, all got together and said, this is how we're different than these other people, given good reason and all that other stuff. This is us. You may think, talking to you, right, the reader, you may think this is an extreme case. To us is not far-fetched. For this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. Right? We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences. But there was always, underline that, but there was always the curious mental phenomenon. Singular. This thing that happens in the brain with people like us that places us beyond human aid. We have two alternatives: to go on to the bitter end or accept spiritual help to have this element removed, this thing that they're talking about that parallels with our sound thinking, this malady that centers in the mind that we can't see, feel, and touch is there undetected, right? That parallel with our sound reason, there was invariably some insane, trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out. So they're going to give us another example here. And you should read through all this. And before they do the qualifier, they're going to re-emphasize what they've been talking about all along, but they're going to put it in more palatable words where there's no confusion of what they're saying here, right? Because if you're kind of reading this far, and what they say, that people who are able to stop drinking or not pick up anymore based on what they were talking about on page 20, 21, they're doing a full circle here, right? right? Given good reason, ill health, warning a doctor, trauma-based, like on and on and on. All these people who are able to stop based on those ideas of fixing self with self are a little different than us. That may be true of non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate. Back to page 20. Back to page 2021. We went through those qualifiers, right? Right? So they talk about here, because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. Wait a minute. So, but the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is the point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize to smash home upon our alcoholic readers. It has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let's take another illustration. Let's look at it from another point of view, right? Because they know how we think. How do they know how we think? Because they went through a process of having to smash the idea that they could control and enjoy their drinking, right? That they had this allergy. They had to confirm that, and that they were beyond human aid and unable to determine when they were going to drink again, but they knew they were going to drink again. That's a step one promise, right? Everybody talks about all these promises as step one. So they talk about Fred here. And as we go through with Fred, they talked about here on page 40, we told him what we knew of alcohol, we knew about alcoholism. He was interested and concerned that he had some of the symptoms, like most of the people in the fellowship. Oh, I believe what you said, okay, to be true is past tense, but not again in the future. This is the way most people think, right? But he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. There's the obsession, fixing self with self, right? He was positive that his humiliating experience, plus the knowledge that he had acquired in regards to the problem, would keep him sober for the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. Seems to be a theme, right? So has this guy done step one? Does he admit he has a problem? Yeah, so a lot of people, you hear, I did step one before I got here. So you admit you had a problem, but you haven't done step one. You haven't had the step one experience yet. He's like most people in our fellowship. Not all of us go through this process. Nobody's exempt from this. There should be a way I could fix myself. There should be a way I should be able to 90 meetings in 90 days and be amazed before I'm halfway through. There's got to be maybe read page 417 3 times a day. There's got to be acceptance, letting go, surrender, spin myself around, and there's got to do there's got to be something that can fix me without having to do this. Okay, let us know. But we only offer one course of action and one solution in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's outlined in here. If anybody's offering you anything other than this, then they're a really misinformed member of Alcoholics Anonymous or not like us. Because this is our program of recovery. This is what we offer new people so they could find what we've been given freely. As responsible members, we should be taking new people through this. So, we heard no more of Fred. And then he ends up back in the hospital. And he talks about here, I rather appreciate your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink. I was confident it would not happen to me after what I had learned. Right? I reasoned I was not that so far advanced as you fellows were. So anyways, he talks about here on the next page where there wasn't a cloud in the horizon. Everything was fantastic. And they talk about, I went to my hotel room, leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to me that a couple highballers, right, with dinner would be great. That would be all, nothing more. I would order a cocktail with my meal, then I'd order another cocktail after dinner. So he's talking about his experience. What's the difference between him and the car dealership, Jim? Nothing. because the example they're giving is about the condition in the mind, not the condition around them. And that's where the confusing part comes from, because if I think the problems are based on doing nothing, if I'm doing better, then there's no way I'm going to drink. If I keep on guard and do this, and this, there's no way I'm going to drink like this guy. But because of the malady that centers in the mind as a phenomenon, right, there came a time where he was without defense against that first drink. And they talk about over here on page, when we get into this, page 42, where they go back and visit him, and what they talk about his experience where he saw that willpower, right, and self-knowledge would not fix this problem, that he had an alcoholic mind. So what does it mean to have an alcoholic mind? It's not the devious things I do as a human being. That doesn't give me an alcoholic mind, right? What gives me an alcoholic mind is this malady that where I'm without defense against the first drink. That's the only thing that they associate with having an alcoholic mind. That's alcoholism. The rest is the human dilemma. If I took away alcoholism and I talked about just the human struggles, welcome to the world. But my treatment seems to be with alcohol that leads to my demise. Right? Because once I remove alcohol, now the problem starts. I need a solution for the human dilemma. So when they get into this thing here, they talk about smashing the idea where he has the step one experience. They talk about 2 members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I did not like so much. Then they asked me if I thought myself alcoholic, meaning having those 2 symptoms, right? And if I were really licked this time, meaning I can't be my own solution, that I know inevitably I'm going to drink again. That's what they mean by that. I had to concede. Concede. There's that word again. It must be important, right? They're using the exact same word in the exact same association in regards to the process, right? I had to concede both propositions. Yes, that I was alcoholic and I was hooped. Right? That I was beyond human aid. I'm going to continue. This is going to continue to be my story. Right? They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality, the malady, the phenomenon that precedes the first drink, right? Such as I had exhibited in Washington. What did he exhibit in Washington? The suddenly. That's the same as Jim. Didn't matter about what was happening around him, because when you get sober, it doesn't matter what's happening around you. You're going to be okay if you've gone through this and had a psychic change or spiritual experience. Right? But if you haven't had that, it doesn't matter what's going on around you. You're still going to drink. You see what I'm getting at? So it really has nothing to do with around you. It's what's happening inside of you. And if the problem's still present, then you continue to have this guy's experience, right? They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality, as such as I exhibited in Washington, was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozens. This process snuffed out the last flicker of hope and conviction that I could do the job myself. I smashed the idea. That's what they mean by that. Smash this thing, right? How are we doing for time? Then they outline the spiritual program and answer they found after the step one experience, not before. A lot of people in our fellowship are bypassing step one and going right to the solution, right? But it's a behavioral modification. You need to understand what the problem is. You really need to understand you can't swim if you can't swim. But if you've always jumped in the pool and hang on to the side of the pool and you've never had any real struggles, but a few close calls, well, then you got to kind of like be pushed in the middle of the pool. I don't know how else to explain. You need to have the experience that, oh my God, I can't afford to do that. Well, the good thing is that doesn't have to be your story anymore, right? We have a solution. We're going to get into that next week, kind of continue reading. Next week, we'll get into we agnostics. So hope live long and prosperous. I hope you guys had as much fun as I did. We'll have some answers, question and answer period afterwards. And let's close with a great meditative prayer. What do we need for a good life? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And hopefully you had a step 1 experience. And let's move on to the step 2. Live long and prosperous. And we'll have questions and answers for those who want to participate. We really hammered step 1. A lot of people said you went through this really fast because a lot of it was really overview. If you're kind of joining us, we go through this like week after week, and sometimes we spend a lot of time in one area because not that we're thick, but most of us have our own ideas based on our own ideas, based on our own thinking and our own understanding. So we go to meetings and we formulate an idea based on ourselves. Anybody here? Right? And so what we look for is other people to confirm how we think in regards to what's being presented. And a lot of people don't realize that the people in the meeting, most people who are new, think everybody but them has this. So everybody who shares has done this. Yes? Right? Anybody? So we listen intensely to all these other people, and what we're looking for is things that we agree with. Same like when we read the big book, we're looking for things based on our own understanding, and we'd miss most of it. Or we'd go by what other people said, other people's ideas, other people, what they got taught by people who didn't know any better themselves. And so that lineage of misinformation keeps on getting passed down. Right? Nobody challenged the idea, or where does that come from? And what a lot of people do will argue their understanding instead of being open to what's being presented. So, well, this is what the book says. And people will go, I don't really want to talk about the book, right? Like, I want to talk about my own understanding. Well, I don't, like my sponsor, he says, the first thing I need to do is get you through this so we have something to talk about. Otherwise, it's just a one-sided conversation. I kind of went, he says, because I'm living by spiritual principles and you're still living by things that sound good. Like, the guy hurt my feelings a lot. He was very insensitive. He wasn't very accommodating. And he would hang up on me a lot. Right? Like, he'd say, go read this, and I'd go read it, and I'd say, he says, well, what did you get? And I would tell him what I got from him. He says, it doesn't say that. And I would argue my understanding instead of saying, oh, what does it say? He'd say, go read it again, click. Go read it again, click. And then what happens is, like, I'd really study it, and then I'd look at it, what does this say when you read this, right? Because English is not my strong, like, my mom was French, broken English, same with my dad, and the people I grew up with were English was their second language. And where I grew up, education wasn't a big thing. Do you know how to work? Can you lift that? Right? Can you lift that? Can you do? So manual labor and getting out and getting a job and providing was what I was taught. So I've had the benefit over the last, I met my wife 19 years ago. We're coming up to our 16th anniversary. And I've had the great pleasure of learning a lot from her because she has her master's in English, right? And this is the type of people we are. I say we because I've dealt with a lot of people like me, like people with the same mindset. Remember the doctor said being maladjusted and full flight from reality and downright mental defectives? I can't see what other people see. I can't hear what they're hearing. Does that kind of make sense? Right? So, like I said, and she's part of the Golden Key Club, top 10% in her field, masters in English, right? It won't stop me from arguing with her about the English language. And she'll pause, and she'll just look at me, and if we're in the office, she'll look up on the wall, and she goes, I like your credential. All I have on the wall is my level 3 first aid. And around the wall is Simon Fraser University, Golden Key Club. So, and then I catch myself, right? And then that's kind of force-fed in humility, right? Of, okay, what are you explaining? So we've gone over the book quite a bit and how it's put together. She's read it, which I thought would be a great idea, teaching her what was in the book. She read it once and she came up with ideas that I would never have thought of, right? A normie, right? She goes, oh, like right from, like I wanted to say, give me the book back, right? Because I'm being challenged on certain ideas that I'd never looked at, right? And I wasn't open to look at it different. So humility would go, what is it? Like, what is it that I'm missing here? Or what is it that you're trying to say or think? So when, and it's the same like sponsorship or people who've been through this, our first indication is to argue or go with what we heard. Would we, some of us agree to that? Right? And then if you've ever done the worksheets, like my good friend James here, what you do is you look for the answers you think it is. And you spend 2 days going over the same pages over and over, looking for what you've been taught instead of what it says. Anybody? How many people's done that? I'm looking for what I think it says instead of what it does say. Right? So we know this is a basic text. Yes, we all agree it's the transferring of information. Usually when a textbook's put together, it's written by one person and reference different people's ideas. Here's the collective understanding of the first 100 men and women. Right? We kind of, with that idea, formula that they've kind of, that was presented to them, that they put into application. They've seen it kind of worked for people like us, and they put their collective experience in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous so it wouldn't get garbled or lost. So those who have yet to show up here would still have the same hope that we were presented. And where they talked about that, you'll see where I'm going here in a second, where they talked about that was back early introduction when we were approached by those with whom the problem had been solved. So when they talked about that on page 25, that's the key part there. When we were approached by those with whom the problem had been solved, right? So when we look at step 2, that's the basis of step 2. Last week we looked at the hopeless condition of step 1, yes? Like we really hammered that home of this condition that we can't see, feel, and touch, right? But ego wants to see, feel, and touch it. Because if we could see, feel, and touch it, and I could monitor it, then I'll apply the steps when I think it's deemed necessary. So the people who think like that, including myself, hadn't had a step 1 experience yet. Right? And they talked about that when they talk about this guy where we're going to go here on page 43. They talk about him having the step 1 experience. And all the way through more about alcoholism, they talk about what that looks like to have this experience. And everybody who's had the step 1 experience in our basic text, right, has had that feeling of the gates of hell slamming shut on them. They've had that feeling of impending doom, right? So remember that guy they talked about here on page 26 back, where he thought he could be his own solution. Remember that guy? And we all thought we were like that. Yes? How many people... I'll just apply more to me because I really mean it this time, all the other time. So self-talking to self, what you really don't understand is the illness. So one of the tests we always do to see how many people would like to see if they've actually done step 1 or not. Nobody. Okay, we're going to do the test anyways. I asked a trick question. Okay, here it is. How many people has relapsed here in the past? Everybody's hand should go up, right? When you hear people say, oh, relapse isn't a part of my story, then they don't understand the story. They don't understand the illness, because if it wasn't a part of their story, they wouldn't be coming to us looking for help. They would have fixed their problem long ago, like other problems. So it's a reoccurring thing that keeps on happening that has them seeking us, counsel with us, to find out what the problem is, what the solution is, and whether they need to apply this or not to their lives in order to recover, right? So most people who are able to quit drinking, like the 3 questions on page 2021, they talked about given good reason, can you quit or modify? And how many people's had good reason here? More than once. That's why they say if hundreds of episodes, and then I only think of the most, catastrophic ones. But there's hundreds of episodes that show me I can't drink like other people, but I kind of missed it because I was looking for the consequence. Anybody? I'm consequence orientated because the only time I have problems with drinking is when I get in trouble. The nights I don't get in trouble, I have no problem with drinking, right? So I didn't understand. But when you get the illness part, where they talk about, we've gone through this, and it says, so how do I know if I've done step 1 or not? So on page 43, right? 42, right? They talk about their outlay, which is outlined for us who work with people in working with others. There's a formula. So what we do in this study is exactly what's laid out in working with others. Right? They're very specific on how to work with new people. So when we look in hindsight, we see, oh my goodness, I'm presenting the same process that was presented to me that enables me to have success where I wasn't able to have success before. I'm having a different experience where I wasn't able to get access to that. So when we get into the design of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is when you have fortunate enough to get in a group that's AA based, I don't know how else to say that, where the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is the basis of people's recovery in there, and the traditions is what they live by in their meetings and all that. So most of us, without realizing it, the first thing we're introduced to without realizing is the traditions, right? And when we bump up against them, members will say this, like, don't worry about that. The only requirement for membership, don't worry about that. It's okay. Like, just relax here. So, we don't talk about outside issues. So we get taught the traditions as we go along. We're embraced by it, right? Without realizing it, right? And then we go through the process. We get introduced to this because, what's our primary purpose? Tradition 1, Tradition 5, Tradition 12. You hear this. So we're learning about that without realizing we're learning about it. So we're afflicted with alcoholism without understanding the scope of it. Does that kind of make sense? It's already taken place, right? We're not actually doing step 1. We're confirming step 1. We're conceding that it's true, that I'm afflicted with, or I'm afflicted with this illness. I'm not, whether I do it or not doesn't change my circumstances, yes? And we said this last week, just because you could sit in a bar all day, that don't get you drunk, sitting in a bar. What gets you drunk is participating in drinking. It's just like sitting in a meeting won't get you sober if you're this type. You need to participate in the steps. That's why they read how it works. They're very specific. They're saying, you know what? Remember, we deal with alcohol. What am I remembering? Oh, I understand the illness factor to this thing. Yes? And the likelihood of my success isn't in my favor. That's why we hand out chips instead of plaques. Right? Because if we were able to keep my wall would be filled with plaques. 42 years of them, but I wasn't able to do that, right? So as the result of this course of action that we're going to talk in tonight, I was able to have a different experience. So I was fortunate enough to end up in a group that embraced Alcoholics Anonymous. What that translates into, that gave me the opportunity by presenting what Alcoholics Anonymous was. So they were geared toward my success. What they needed was my participation in their course of action, in what they did, not my understanding and what I need to do. Everything was based on their understanding, what they had to do. It was already laid out before me. It's like a job interview. When you get this job, you need to do this, this, this. So really, the introduction to AA is like a job interview. Is this a right fit? Do you need to be here? Right? And blah, blah. So it's kind of like that. And so where we're at here, on 42, they talk about 2 of the members as Katie here? No. Okay, 2 of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned. And we understand why that was, because they told him earlier, if you're afflicted with this illness, the likelihood of you staying sober is not in your interest. He didn't think it was applicable to him because he still had a lot of self-will, or he didn't understand the step 1 experience. And so when he had the step 1 experience again that he kind of talked about here, I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental blind spots. We understand that as the malady, something that's lying dormant that we can't see, feel, and touch. So if you have that condition, that's what places you beyond human aid. And it should be something that kind of is like we used to say, I don't know if it's appropriate to say it anymore, but what we used to say is like having epilepsy. Right? You know you have it, but you don't know when it's going to happen again. Right? And when it happens again, like all the hindsight in the world. So what can I do to stop me from having it again? It would be the point once you realize you have this condition. Right? Everybody's witnessed it. Is there something I could do so I'm not continuously be afflicted with this illness, epilepsy? Does that kind of make sense? Yeah, you could take a course of action where you're not as afflicted with it, right? And blah, blah, blah. So that's what we used to use as an example here, right? Something lies there, you can't see, feeling it. When it happens, it's too late, you can't stop it. And that's kind of like the thing. So they talk about 2 members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see, they grinned, which I didn't like so much, meaning Did you, now you see what we were saying? Because when we talk about step one being the admittance that we're going to relapse 100%, people lose their shit about that in meetings. They do, because they don't like the idea that step one refers to, or you hear people say, oh, step one isn't a part of recovery. Yes, it's the first step in recovery, right? It's the first step. Otherwise, we'd just go to step two, right? Step one isn't a part of, yeah, it's step one. It's the condition that makes step two look really good. The more you understand step two, the more step one, the more step two sounds really appealing. And that's what they talk about here, which I did not like so much. And then they asked me if I thought myself alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. See, they already explained to him on a previous page what alcoholism was. Yes, the condition of the mind and body, the two symptoms, not three, two symptoms that make him alcoholic. Not his past experiences, his childhood traumas, all that may make him thirsty, but that doesn't make him alcoholic. So regardless of the demographic he was born in, he would have, maybe the story would look a little different on the impact, but it would be the same. When he took a drink, he couldn't control the amounts he drank, and now that he wanted to say stop, he found he couldn't stay stop. And that's the universal experience regardless of your demographics. Creed, color, religion, regardless. That's the two things that make you alcoholic. Now, then the qualifier is there are those two who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders. They have more challenges, but many of them could recover if they have the capacity to be honest. About what? About what the problem is, what the solution is, and the application of the. That kind of covers it. So I digressed here. If I was really licked this time, I had to concede. We covered that last week. Great, both propositions, right? They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic malady, such as I exhibited in Washington, was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozens. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. So this is what we do in meetings like this, because I don't got the time to sit with each individual and see if you got step one or not. But you could see if you got step one or not. So if you have a pen and paper, do you have a pen and paper? You could see if you understand and have actually conceded and had the step one experience or not. Ready? Think back to your last relapse. The last time before where you said you were never going to drink again and drank again. Everybody there? So you're sitting there, you're about to pick up again. Write down the first thing that comes to mind here. What would you, if we could go back in time to that situation, and you're sitting there, right, where everybody thought you were going to stay sober, and now you're about to change the whole projection of your life here again, right? You're about to, the insidious insanity is about to take place in the bewilderment of the four horsemen, bewilderment, terror, right, the baffling thing. So you're sitting there, what would you do different now? Write down the first thing you thought of. You're back in that moment, right? And you're just about to pick up, what would you do different? You writing it down? Everybody writing it down? If you have any other answer, then there's nothing I could have done. If you have an other answer than that, then there's a reservation in the understanding of what the problem is. Because if you could have done something different, then you're not powerless over alcohol. So self doesn't want to acknowledge that there was nothing you could have done. That is the outcome and the predicament and the case being presented here in regards to step one, and me conceding to that idea that he's talking about here. Right? So after 11 years of in and out, when I got explained this, now I realized why I couldn't stay sober all those other times. And that when I went back in my drinking history, I remember those times I had 3 months, 6 months. One time I had 16 months because I nearly killed a person in a situation that horrified me. In the blackout, that situation kept me sober for 16 months. But what happened? I was sitting in a restaurant tavern, which I've done many times, like that guy with the ounce of whiskey and milk. It was my birthday. And the waitress said, I was having a coffee, everything was fine, no thought, no upset, nothing, no desire whatsoever. Lady goes, would you like a little something for your coffee? Something happened in my mind that I was unable to detect, see, feel. It says, you know your character defects so much better now. is mostly those people you drank with, and you just got a raise at work. You're not even hanging around with those people anymore. I said, sure. That's the insanity, the blind spot. So now I go back to that situation, and George goes, what could you have done different there? Nothing. Because the illness had me. That's what makes me powerless. And so then George says, well, what can you do about this episode from taking place again? And that was follow through with the solution that's being presented to me to recover from this condition, that the problem's removed from the sequence of my experience. So when this problem gets removed, then what I have is a daily reprieve from this thing, contingent on certain ideas, not my own ideas. Yes? So we see that happens next here. Then, this is very important, then, not after step one, not before step one. A lot of people are trying to sell people the solution before you beat them into submission with the problem. Right? Because our job is to disturb people about the question of alcoholism. If people think they already have a solution to a problem they don't understand, they're going to bypass this, and it might be a year, 2 years, 5 years, but like they said earlier, even though you may have been able to stay sober for a period of time, the insanity will return. And then they'll be baffled how this happening in because they don't understand the condition. That's why it said back on page 20, therefore, when we were approached with whom the problem had been solved. Page 24, right? It talked about until an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be done. Why is that? So my conviction this time around over the last 36 years is I know what I'm up against based on my step one experience. So before understanding alcoholism, what I would have said was phone somebody, pray, not take it, go to a meeting. Anybody have that answer down there? See how self? So if you're able to do that, are you powerless over alcohol? And here's the thing that we don't catch. If I was able to do that, stop myself, then why didn't I stop myself? So that goes back to the malady that centers in the mind, a condition that we really don't understand. But when it's present, this is what it looks like. These people lost the ability to choose. Not all the time. I could do 99 no's and 1 yes, but I don't know when that yes happens. Right? It just, something happens that parallels with my sound thinking, yes? So now, the doctor, when we first got the book, it talked about the story of how many thousands of men and women who have recovered, yes? So like I said earlier, I gave my wife the book, she looked at that page, she asked me about that, what's the most important statement there? What I said was recovered. But she says, no, it's the story. Without the story, the recovered part isn't so remarkable. When you understand the story of alcoholism, and the doctor reiterates that, yes? Remember the doctor talking about these certain types that were beyond his reach? Right? When you understand that story, he says, come stand on the firing lines with me. He sees why we welcome this movement. He says, these people were out of touch. Look at the wives and the children. Look at the people who are associated with this thing, the heartbreak that he used. You know what I mean? People strapped to I don't know if you've ever seen people like it's a little less now, but back, like full-blown DTs, like I thought I had a good understanding of it. In early sobriety, I worked at a place called Triage. And it was an emergency shelter, downtown east side, Vancouver. And so I was an emergency care worker for a while. Circumstances had me there. It worked out great. But I watched this guy suffering from alcoholism. A lot of them back then were drinking ginseng, which really high salt content, right? Like chronic alcoholics. I used to think I was a chronic alcoholic, but I never got to that stage yet. So when they talk about save the last 10 or 15 years, and you get to witness what that looks like, people with their liver beside them, people who get their legs cut off and still drinking, the inability, then you kind of go, wow. Or people turn so jaundiced that they can't bring them back. Like, we have our own experience, but the idea of how more farther we can go. So the DTs, they talked about this doctor in his facility witnessing this. This guy came down. He already had one leg cut off. He was in bad shape. He was having DTs. He came down the stairs, like he slithered down the stairs screaming, right? And he was pulling off his lip because he thought there was something growing in it. We had to restrain him. right? And the ambulance came and got him and got him hooked up on some Demerol, whatever it was, to help him with the DTs. And I watched that and I go, oh my God, when I seen that one episode, it just gave me a sense of thank you, God, that I didn't have to die from this thing. And second of all, I referred back to the doctor's opinion where he said these people would be lined in their hallways, in the rooms, and the screaming, and he would try to find a solution for these people, and a lot of them were dying, right? And then when he seen this movement happening, he said he welcomed it. He was a witness to the miracle that was available to us, which we call now Alcoholics Anonymous, and the program of recovery that was put in terms that is palatable for people like us. What kind of people like us? People who are difficult and won't participate in the saving of their own life. Because we're maladjusted, full-fledged for morality, and downright mental defectives. But there's something with pain and hearing that go hand in hand. Anybody ever notice that? Anybody ever notice the more pain you're in, the more acute your hearing is? Yes. And then after 2 weeks, maybe it wasn't that bad. So anyways, and then the doctor kind of witnessed these new people that was coming through his facility that were outside his scope of helping. It's really remarkable when you think about this, that the people who were outside his scope of help, Bill, acquired certain ideas that he put into practice. This doctor witnessed this miracle taking place in his facility, and then he started working with other people. And this continued to happen. This movement, he called it, which became the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what's amazing about that is there started to be a solution for people like us. So he goes on to say people who were outside his scope of helping, like giving good reason and the application of certain regimen or disciplines, inspirational books and all that they seem to help, that these people, like 417 doesn't work for. All the acceptance, all the surrender, all the letting go, all the self-talk, doesn't work for. Frothy emotional appeal, he calls it, right? Which a big percent of our fellowship does, and there's nothing wrong with that. The only requirement for membership is there to stop drinking. But unless the alcoholic understands the nature of the problem, they're the only one dying of alcoholism in AA, right? So if you have a whole group of people able to get sober and stay sober through the 12 and 12, and an alcoholic of our description shows up there, they won't be able to do it. And then they'll put the onus on them, but really they don't understand the nature of the beast, and they don't understand why these people can't get sober the same way they do, because they're not engaged in the AA program of recovery that brings about a certain result. What's the result? The doctor talked about that these people have to acquire an entire psychic change, yes? So who's the first person that gave us that idea? Yes, they talked about earlier, we're 100 men and women, more than 100 men who have recovered, but they really don't give you the scope. It's an introduction to a thought that these people recover from an illness that we don't fully comprehend yet. So we're in the doctor's opinion. And he talks about we continue to relapse in spite of our story, in spite of our wants, wishes and hopes and dreams and aspirations and everything we do on our own resources, right? Because we find out lack of power is our dilemma. I need to get access to the same experience of the first 100 men and women. And how the doctor refers to that, he says, the message that can hold and keep these people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideas, yes, their ideas, must be grounded in a power greater than themselves. That's what he witnessed was the difference. So what we're being offered to is certain principles, application that, yes, we have to reason with, look at, but the application is what creates the connection. Does that kind of make sense? So how do I move from the thinking of working the steps, right, that we get here all the time, working the steps, which says nowhere. It's about the experience of the steps. So the step one experience is hopelessness, right, impending doom. The presentation of step two is the possibility of hope, the possibility of a different story. But what's being presented to us, they talk about here, is on, they talk about over here, I'll get there in a second. They talk about here the course of action on page 25. Who's presenting this course of action? They are. And this is an outlay of what this thing is that they're presenting that's based on the doctor's opinion, yes? right? So they're expanding on that. And Bill's story was an example of what it looks like in somebody's life. So remember in Bill's story, when he's talking to Ebby, right? Ebby presented the solution after the acknowledgement of the hopelessness of his situation. And Bill realized, he realized he was just as hopeless, the identification, when therefore we were approached with the problem had been solved. So Bill seen he was just as hopeless as him, but Ebby's having a different experience, right? And so Ebby didn't show up at that point and say, choose your own conception. He said, let me explain my experience here that was presented to me, that I put in application, allowing me to have this experience. Yes? So Ebby talked about a course of action. After Bill had the understanding of that, his ideas of miracles were revised right then and there. Yes? Yeah, right? Then he's seen his own understanding was crippling him from having the same experience that was being presented to him. That he had to participate in what was being presented to him if he was going to survive what he was suffering from. Yes? So when his friend said, choose your own conception of what's being presented, so he has an understanding of the course of action that his friend took. He says, choose your own conception means, how can I make this palatable enough for me to make a start? And he talked about that earlier. He talked about all that was required of me was to be willing to believe that there was a power greater, paraphrase, that there is a power greater than me. Nothing else was required. To what? That he believes there's something greater than him based on what was presented to him. Yes, do we agree on that? And he made a decision to do what? The course of action. So you see, step 2 is not about his understanding of God. It's about formulating a conception that he could acquire the pursuit of this course of action. And then they talk about this on 25, right? And so as they talked about here on 42, they talked about here, then they outlined the spiritual answer and the program of action, which 100 of them had followed. So when we talk about step 2, we're not talking about our understanding of God here. What we're talking about, what allowed me to have this experience, enabling me to recover as the result of a course of action. I'm explaining the course of action that I took, that was explained to me, that had me taking their course of action. Yes, does that kind of make sense? Am I on the right page here? Am I losing? That kind of makes sense? So like when you go to a mechanic, how many people have been to a mechanic or a dentist? Or witness somebody else be right? So what you do is present the problem. You present the symptoms of the problem. Yes? You go, this, make all funny noises or explain stuff. And then based on what you're presenting, they tell you what the problem is. Here, we tell you what the problem is, and you get to diagnose whether you have it or not. And then with a mechanic or a dentist, they say, oh, based on what you're exhibiting here, or based on this problem, we need to apply this solution. Right? And in the solution is the required course of action to bring about the result. So that's why the confirmation of step 1 is relapse. 100%. The confirmation of the step 2 of the idea that's being presented in step 2 is the course of action that they talked about all the way through here so far. Right? Every time they talked about the solution, they was talking about engaging in a course of action, yes or no? All the way through, right from the doctor's opinion, right? They got sold on certain ideas, provided they took other simple steps. They talked about a continuation, right? And what does step 12 says? It says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result, singular, as the result of what? The course of action presented in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you want to know whether you're in the program or not, you could show somebody where you're at in the book and what you're doing. If you can't do that, then you're not in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. You've engaged in somebody else's course of action. What works for them may kill you. And it may kill somebody else that you're presenting this to later. Because if it's a life and death thing, then this is pretty serious. So when I got presented to this, after 11 years of in and out, think about that. I'm puking green bile, dying of alcoholism in AA. I just finished I got out here in 87, right? Like, I mean, done. Federal, provincial trial. Like, I'm finished. I'm like, I'm done. Vomiting green bile. My liver's like I don't mean this to be ignorant, but I mean my body was shutting down. Like I wasn't having like solid functioning human movements anymore. It was black. I wasn't. I was turning a bit of jaundice. Like my life was on the line, and this is in and out of meetings, trying to do everything I could to get this. And so my last relapse, I did over 360 meetings in 90 days. I had a 3-month chip in my pocket. I was in 4, 12, and 12 studies, right? It was Saturday, April 8th. I left that meeting with a 3-month chip in my pocket. An hour later, I was drinking. With the 3-month chip in my pocket, gave the best talk of gratitude and hope that I've ever given, and outlook and hope that things were changing. Right, I was getting a bit of employment. Things were starting to look good. I was eating a bit of solid food, because the first time I ate solid food, it put me in the hospital. Like, that's how sick I got. I couldn't eat like a Caesar, like a Greek salad. Like the solid food, nearly killed me. I ended up in the hospital, like sober, from this stuff. So give you a rough idea. And then these guys conned me into a big book study, and I went through their process. I did exactly what they did, and that's what they talk about working with others. They talk about have them read the book, which most new people haven't, and then ask them if they're prepared to go through with it, that you'd guide them through it, that you could give them practical experience of what? For them to have their own experience of what's being presented here, right? So this is built for success. If I'm not having success, then I've missed something. Conception, look up the word this week. It's really interesting. I used to think I knew what it meant until I looked it up. Conception is the building of ideas from getting point A to point B to construct a certain thing that was wished for on this side of it, right? So when you get a model, you know what you're getting, but you have the drawings as the conception that allow you to get from here to there. And if you follow the instructions, it should look like what's on the box, yes, or the puzzle, right? Does that kind of make sense? And the same with the book. The book's designed in such a way, when it says rarely, right, they mean it. So what it says, like April 8th here, I'll be 36 years, right, as the result of this course of action. 11 years of it not being available to me, and then somebody made it available to me because I ended up in a group that was designed for success. What that means is when I entered that group, they didn't start telling me they were working with me. They didn't start telling me that they were grooming me to move me in a certain direction. They just started working with me. And when I look back, they manipulated me, they conned me, they lied to me, and they saved my life. Right? They got me to participate in something I didn't realize I was participating in. They never asked my permission. And if you ever come to Langley, you come to the Way Out group, is the thing with our group is we know you're new. We'll start working on you. We'll start, like a pinball without realizing it. You'll ricochet off of this member, go to that member, and we all got you dialed in. We'll look over. You ever been to a meeting and you see a new one come in, you go, that one's mine. You give a wink and you make sure you get, and you start working with them. And sooner or later, without them realizing, they're sitting in a big book study. They think it's their idea how they got there. They're starting to go through a process. You encourage them. They start having their own experience, and somewhere along the line, they start creating their own momentum, right? Which usually really starts taking place in step 5. So a sponsor's job is to initiate to get them through here. So when we look at the closing here on page 43, they talked about here once more the alcoholic at certain times. So we understand what the certain times means is the malady. And if the malady is present, which I don't know, which is really humbling when you think about this, I don't know when it's present, but I know it's there. Why? Because it's been consistent over my life. That's what makes me different than these other people. So in step 10, where they talk about their experience, it's not the step 10 promises. They're given an overview of the application of these things. And by the time they're halfway through their 9s, through the application of, if you like, 10 and 11 and 12, the recipe that was presented in Bill's story, yes? That somewhere along this line, the problem got removed. You hear people say, this is where the change comes. You hear people say, oh, by the time we get to step 10, it doesn't say that. It's like reading in step 2 when they talk about the psychic change, and we read about it in step 2. Does it's happening in step 2? It happens, they're giving you the information. And so when you look at step 10, it's an overview of their experience by the time they're halfway through. They say, by this time, sanity will have returned. How do they know that? Because they've gone, like Bill in his story, where he talks about, he goes out and he talks about his mind plagued him with resentments and self-pity, but he was able to get past those things where he wasn't able to get through them before, through his reliance on something greater than himself and the application of working with others by carrying this message would save the day. Remember that? Right? So we see that's the basis of his new experience, where before he was crippled with self, he was able to get past that. Right? And so here they're talking about that at certain times. So what happens is I need to have this removed. So in 44, they talk about here is a summary of what they're hoping. Like when we finished Bill's story, it was a summary of hoping what we got out of that, right? When they first paragraph, and there is a solution, talks about what was the purpose of the book up to this point in time, yes? And then when we got to more about alcoholism, what was the first paragraph? A summary of everything we learned up to this point in time. And they said, we're going to expand on that now, right? So I need to know those things. So here is the summary of what they're hoping that we learned here, and that's where good sponsorship comes. If you want to know if you're doing a good job or not, ask your sponsee to explain the first paragraph here. And if they can't explain it, then time to go back over, because it's critical. It's critical, right? Some of us have tried to hold on. They covered that in how it works, right? Some of us tried to hold on to our old ideas. Remember, we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, and powerful. Without it was too much for it. Here's the summary. In the preceding chapters, because they already know, right? They're still talking to you. It's not us. We're not on the same page yet. Later on in the book, they remove the you and they say us. It's collect because I've entered the same experience that they're having. But right now, they've had it and I need it. So when they talk about, you hear people refer to the steps on the wall, that's their experience that you've yet to have. They talk about they were powerless over alcohol. You are still powerless over alcohol. You're not having the same experience they are. It's a we thing. Not unless you did what they did, then it's still a you thing. You need to do what they did to have the same collective experience. Does that kind of make sense? Am I pissing anybody off yet? Anybody phoning their sponsor? Okay, so we got rid of a few people. I thought I was losing my touch. Okay, so in the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We, the people that put this together, and since thousands, we all agree it's a collective understanding of step 1, 2, and the course of action. We all agree on it. It's not my understanding, your understanding. The bases are the same. My conception may be a little different, how I explain it, but the understanding is the same. It doesn't change, right? We hope we've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. I would get my sponsor to explain that. What is that? If you ask me, is this condition of the mind and body? Well, what condition of the mind? The malady that centers in the mind. You have to specify that, because a lot of people, when you say malady, most of them, because of what they heard in meetings, will go to the spiritual malady, which isn't the same thing. And same with the obsessions. There's 2 obsessions the book talks about, and there's 2 different maladies. Yes? But you'd have to read the book and study it as a basic text, right? If, the biggest word in the book, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, because that's the main problem, right? Remember they talked about that on page 22, 23? If we never took a drink again, then the second problem is pointless, right? I'm allergic to pistachios. I've never eaten them again since I got died when I ended up in the hospital. I've never eaten them again. If I continue to eat them again, it moves from a physical problem to something not quite right in the main engine, right? Not firing on all cylinders there, Tony. Like there's something going on, right? And you know what? I'm not seeing a dietitian the 3rd time to the hospital. there's a couple people walking with a notepad and a book and kind of, so how long have you felt this way? And why are you putting that in this white jacket on me? And I don't need to be strapped to this table. And what? I don't need that shot. Because there's something not right? Anyways, if when you honestly wonder, you find you cannot quit entirely because of the malady, not the obsession, right? Because the obsession doesn't put me beyond human aid, right? They're very good. The obsessions in regards to, according to the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the obsessions in regards to the idea that I could control and enjoy my drinking. I haven't even done the first half of step 1 yet, which is in regards to the allergy. And if I can't admit to that, there's no way I'm going to admit to the insanity. That's why they soft pedal it in the doctor's opinion. So once this desire comes back, right, as so many do, they see others drinking with impunity, right? Something happens in their mind. They soft pedal it, because if they would have started with the insanity back there, you'd stop reading the book, yes? So it's a subtle form of entrapment. I love this book, right? It creates a case where it kind of goes, I can't not, I got to concede to it. I have this thing, oh my God. First, it gets your attention with the allergy. Oh my God, yeah, I get thirstier. Yeah, I've seen that all the examples they give on page 31, right? Switching, that's in regards to what? The obsession. All the examples from 33 over is in regards to what? The malady, the 2 symptoms. Most of us have been unwilling that we're bodily, mentally different from our fellows. So I'm able to reiterate that in my own language back then, right? I get thirstier, okay. Or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. So I like this. Or when drinking, if you have little control over the amounts you take, well, without realizing it, you've just answered step 1 again. If you can't control it and you're having problems, well, why didn't you just stop? So it's a catch-22. It always goes back to, right? So if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. So when I look at what they talk about earlier, was I should have read the spiritual appendix in the back of the book. Whose understanding is that? Is theirs, right? I'm getting to understand what they're talking about by saying change of spiritual experience. The educational variety and the suddenly. My sponsor said the real sick people get the suddenly so they can develop the educational. Right? And he says, you're one of those people. I didn't know whether to say thank you or just kind of be insulted. But I had a vital spiritual experience April 8th, sitting in the old hotel. Last call, I did the 3rd step prayer. Not with the idea that I was going to get sober, with the idea I was going to die. And I made that kind of pact with God. I knew I was going to die, and I was kind of reserved to the fact after 11 years in and out, what else was going to be? And I did the 3rd step prayer, and something happened without realizing in that moment. They came with another last call. They put the beer in front of me, and I went to pick. I couldn't even put it to my lips. It was so I was repelled by it. And I went home, I had a 12 behind my bed, like a 12-pack to go to sleep. And I tried to sell it first, to be honest, but I gave it away, right? And something was taking place, right? Like I was having the Bill experience without realizing I was having the Bill experience. Then a train of circumstances followed, where Bill had that experience kind of like this impending doom, yes, sitting in treatment for the 2nd time. He put it out to the universe, and a train of circumstances allowed him an opportunity where people, like I believe this to be true in 99% of the cases, is that in our moment of desperation that we hear, right, G-O-D, right, gift of God, right, gift of desperation is God, G-O-D, right? So in those moments of utter despair and bafflement, that when we have the internal, the in here, anybody there's one thing up here, but then there's the in here, right? The submittance of the humility of my situation, and it kind of set in motion trends like with that power that had George and Rick and those guys show up in my life. With Bill, it was Ebby. So it got put out to the universe. somebody received the call and they said, we're going to put you in touch with one of our agents shortly. Therefore, when we were approached by with whom the problem had been solved, there's people waiting for it. There's a call being made, and you're going to get connected to that call. And when you see it, you'll know it. That's 12-step work for us, right? So here we go. And then they get into the circumstances here. To one who feels atheist or agnostic, so who's this chapter written for, is for everybody. Most people think, I'm a believer, I don't have to read this chapter. But this chapter sets up step 2. It's the whole basis for step 2. You don't read we agnostics or take your responsibility through it, then you miss the whole essence of their experience, what they mean by how to get this thing. Does that kind of make sense? So they talk about if I'm having, and the qualifier, it's worth reading. To one who feels atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. Yes, because I'm thinking again. Like Bill, I'm thinking. I'm tripping over my own understanding, my own thinking, right? If he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety, meaning have this malady, this condition that once a certain point is reached, little or nothing can be done for him. We can't answer the riddle why that is, but this is what it looks like when you're there. Yes, to be doomed to an alcoholic death. Oh my, it didn't mean partying all along and having a great, to be doomed. That's not a very good word for those that don't understand the impact of that. For us, it's, to be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on spiritual basis is not always easy alternatives. We're the only group of people that say, well, how long do I get to make a decision on that? Maladjusted, full-fledged from reality. We're giving a solution to something that's killing us, and I'm tripping over what I think it is. Yes, still. Yes? Because it's my resistance to this thing that has me not experiencing it. So they're saying here, let's go through we agnostics that you could sidestep your thinking to get to the same basis that we all had to get through, was to be willing to believe that there was something greater than myself to make my beginning. Nothing more was required. And as we go through here, which is interesting, 45, they introduce us to the idea that they just finished frothily emotional appeal, everything that we tried for 17, just inspirational books, remind myself every morning that I'm alcoholic. None of that works for us. So why is that? Because lack of power is our dilemma. They talk about this here, right? This is very interesting. Lack of power was our dilemma. It isn't anymore. For who? For those who wrote the book. They got access to this power to have a different experience. It's lack of power is my dilemma. It was theirs. Yes? They're not having the same experience I'm having, but I need to have their experience if I'm going to survive this thing. Yeah, does that come? We had to find a power by which we could live. Live. Underline that. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves. And her name wasn't Brenda or Kim. Right? It had to be a power greater than myself. Some of you got that, Joe. Anyways, I digressed again. Sorry. Kim says up there, yeah, I'm power. Anyway, I'll leave that alone. So, obviously, the longest sentence in the book thus far. But where and how were we to find this power? Question mark. This is where we don't stop and have conversation. It's not one of those book studies you go to where everybody sits around and talks about something they wouldn't understand. They need somebody to kind of give you the basis of it. That's why they talk about when we were approached by those, the problem had been solved, right? Those who are presenting the book, we got a guide through this. This is, they're talking about, we're not sitting around with our understanding. Oh, this doesn't mean, oh, I need to go find God now. That's not what they're saying here. A lot of people think step 2 is the quest for God. That's not what they're saying here. They're reiterating, lack of power was our dilemma. Where and how was I to find this power? Because at this stage of the game, I'm still dying of alcoholism, even though I'm sober. Even though I've abstained 2 months or 3 months at this stage of the game before I enter this process, right? The illness is still lying dormant. Yes? No? Yes? Just because I can't see, feel, and touch it, and based on how I'm thinking, and even though if I don't want to drink again, it doesn't ask you that you'll be able to. We already know we can't. It has nothing to do with what I'm feeling, right? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. His main object, well, that's exactly what this book is about. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. What? Right? Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will help you solve your problem. Does it say that? Help you solve your problem? No, that will solve your problem, because if this power needed your help, it wouldn't work. What we're trying to do is get you out of the way so you can have an experience enabling you to have the same experience we have in saving your life. You're the problem. You're fucking up your own destiny. Oh, I don't mean to swear that. Like we're trying to, can you participate in what we're saying here? Yeah, you can kick and scream and be and drag, but can you participate? Can you follow along? Okay, like, you know, yeah, I can do that. Like, remember, I'm psychotic. These guys are trying, and this guy named Rick, he told me that. He's looking at me, he's almost pulling out my hair, and I'm laughing at him, right? He says, "What's the matter with you?" Well, I said, "That's a good question, isn't it?" I thought we just covered that. He says, and then George would come over and talk to me softly, right? Rick would be, "I can't deal with this guy anymore," because I'm nuts, right? He's trying to deal with me logically instead of spiritually. But anyhow, I've digressed. So what happens is I started going through this, but I had to go through We Agnostics, and it addressed the things personal in me that I struggled with. So this is not an area that we could cover for everybody. If you're atheist, agnostic, or true believer, what are we all suffering from? Lack of power. That's why, remember the guy earlier? He felt comforted that he was a church member, that he had a belief in God, but that's not sufficient as an experience, because lack of power is our dilemma. So one of the most amazing things here, if you kind of read, if you really want something to study this week, and I would suggest it's you'd skim through it reading it yourself, right? So if you went to 44, 45, 44 talks about the human experience and how we're a result of our thinking, our efforts, ideas, feelings, and emotions. And as long as we have the same thinking, feeling, and emotions, we'll always have the same experience. The spiritual experience talks about a different experience and attitude and outlook, something shifting in the brain, which they call a phenomenon, an unexplainable event. Yes? Right, that's available through this course of action. Can you participate in the saving of your own life? I just got to go through this mechanics and I'll have them experience. I can't understand it on this side of it. I need to experience it. The only reference I have to experience is those who are presenting it to me, those who have recovered, that this is available, like Ebby with Bill, right? Regardless of Ebby's understanding, he was looking for the experience, right? And Bill had the same experience, yes? And that's what this recipe is. So then on the next page, and we'll close with this idea, they talk about this is available to all of us. We already have this entity, this life force within inside of us. They're asking us to seek it, right? To look, to see if you have it, right? And they talk about, we found a great reality deep down within us. It's in the last analysis that's only there he may be found. Here's the exercise to see if you have it or not. Go back over your life. Do I have this life force? Do I have this thing that they're talking about? If it's in every man, woman, and child, that means I've already experienced it without realizing I experienced it, right? And that's that voice that says, hey, don't do that. In your despair, hey, why don't you phone this person? What, that thing that talks to you, what are you doing? How many people have that voice that asks you, what are you doing? How many people, put their hands up, what are you doing? The voice says, what are you doing? And you start talking back, well, I'm not too sure. I was hoping you would answer that. I remember looking in the mirror and say, what's the matter with you? And wait for a long pause, like a part of me would answer that. So this voice, and I'll close with this, when I went back over my history to see if this thing was, this entity, this power, this life force was a part of me, I remember this one time I ended up at home. I don't know how I got home. I have no idea. I was in the basement. I was probably 15, 16. I didn't even come to, a little voice said, don't fall asleep on your back. Roll over. That's all I remember. I remember that voice very distinctly. Couldn't tell you where I was, who I partied with, how I got home, anything. I rolled over. And in the morning, there was vomit on the thing. If I would have fell asleep on my back, I would have died of asphyxiation. So that voice, and then I realized, man, that's been there a couple times in my life. And in my most darkest hours, the phone was always rung or somebody showed up. So live long and prosperous. May the force be with you. I enjoyed today. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as me. But the force is available. And why don't we close? We got some questions and answers afterwards. We'll close with a great meditative prayer. What's the main ingredient for a successful life that you need to get access to that we find through the course of action in here that enable you to have the same experience we have, which is God. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Live long and prosperous. May the force be with you. I really had fun today. See you guys next Tuesday. Do your homework.